Alright, this first video is going to show you how to paint white puffy clouds, kind of like these. I'm going to use this as my reference, but I'm not going to try to match it exactly. I'm going to use it for a rough guideline just on how to shape clouds, and I'll post this as well for you to use. But same thing as you'll see me do, I'm not going to try to match it like perfectly. That just kind of inhibits you and slows you down. You've got to be able to work quickly. We're going to be working wet and wet technique again, and using a little lifting technique as well. We're just going to use two colors. We're just going to use our cobalt blue and our burnt umber. We'll use the blue obviously for the sky, and then we'll mix the burnt umber and the blue to make a gray, to do the gray of the clouds. So let's start by taking the big brush and wetting, and we're dividing our paper just into two instead of into three. So you can tape it down, just put one strip through the middle because we're going to want a little bit bigger area for painting clouds. Get our paper nice and wet. I didn't mix my water or my paint ahead of time. Well, I'm just using blue to start anyway. Let that soak in a little bit. And now I'm going to switch. Now you could paint them. Some artists paint with a square brush, or maybe I'll change it up. You could go with a square brush, or you could go with a round brush. Doesn't matter. It's up to you. I guess I'll do this first one with a round brush. So I'll grab some of my paint. And again, you just want to get your, when you're working wet and wet, you just want to get your paint fluid. Okay, just barely get it fluid. You want it nice and saturated with pigment, especially as we start at the top of the sky, because the top of the sky is usually the sky that's closest to you, and it usually gets lighter as you go down because the sky at the bottom near the horizon, that sky is far away, so it's faded. Just like in doing our gradients, our blue gradients, we turn those into a sky. The sky is always darker at the top, gets lighter at the bottom because this is closer, that's farther away. And you're going to notice with the clouds, these clouds are closer, these clouds here are further away. So here, the clouds that are closer, you see them kind of separated, they're big and puffy. As they get further away, they kind of mash together and they get flatter because we don't see they're overlapped, and all we see is the bottom. So it's a bunch of horizontal lines when we get down here, where it's more curvy lines. All right. So my paint is, or my water, turn it there a little bit, see if you can see the glisten in it. I can't seem to really get it at the right angle, but it's glistening, but not puddled. All right. So take my paint, and I'm going to use kind of not so much the tip of my brush, but I like to sort of use the side of my brush as I paint. And I'll just start up here and work my way down, and kind of roughly I'll come in here, kind of put some separations in between the clouds, a little bit in here. And you're going to see some bleeding, okay? It all depends on how wet your paper is. The more you can see, it looks like roots kind of growing down in. You know, I'll probably let my paper get a little bit too wet. I'm going to add a little bit more blue up the top here to kind of concentrate that a little bit more. Okay. And I can lift some of that out. And in fact, yeah, this can all be, might even increase the blue here a little bit. In fact, I'm going to rinse out my brush, dry it off on my towel, and I'm going to lift some of that out. Rinse, dry, lift. Okay, see how that kind of pulls that out? And you can even lift into the blue areas a little bit, because that creates a softer edge, and it creates, you can even kind of put some in the background in there. It looks like clouds sort of, you know, broken up and sort of far away a little bit. So again, I'm not really trying to follow my I'm just adding a little blue in here, put a little separation, a little variety. See how I can put some in there and lift it off a little bit. Still kind of bleeding in, but I can go back in and add some more. So now I'm going to take some more blue over here. Add some burnt umber to it to kind of get a gray. Probably a little too watery. Maybe it'll be all right. A little bit more brown. There we go. Get a nice gray color going. It's a little too fluid though. I got to dry off my brush. Get a little more because I don't want it, if I have it too wet, my paint is going to go too far. When you're doing the gray part of it, you don't want it to get too carried away. All right. There we go. See, this is too fluid. This is a little bit thicker and darker. So, hopefully my paint is still wet enough. And I'm going to come in here and start to add some shadows along the bottoms of these clouds. Okay. Let that sort of flow. Okay, let that flow up in. And I'm not worried about every single, like I said, every single part of this. Okay, and then as I move down here, now I'm going to start to do some more kind of horizontal lines as the clouds get lower. In fact, I'm going to add a little blue. I'm going to take some of my blue, maybe just a touch of water. Start to add some blue in here as well. Maybe a little bit more water. I want this a little bit lighter down here. All right. There we go. All right. And that's the majority of your clouds right there. Now again, I can rinse out my brush and I can start to lift and soften some of those tentacles, if you will, because they've sort of taken off. And after a while, you have to rinse your brush again, dry it off. And on the tops, the bottoms, I don't care, they can bleed a little bit more. But I can kind of lift into there as well. You can come in and kind of create some separations and kind of put in some clouds. I might even switch to one of my smaller brushes to get into smaller spaces if I want. Get in here like that, lift, rinse and lift. I can lift at some highlights here down at the bottom for some distant clouds. And sometimes this is where the flat brush is really handy because it's stiffer bristles. If I get that wet, I can kind of go like this and kind of lift a little bit easier. Pull and lift like that. Almost wish I had a smaller brush. And then we can come in and even reinforce some of the darks. Take your dark again and go a little bit darker, you know, in some areas. Let that kind of bleed. Do a few horizontal strokes down in here a little bit. See, so it's still a little bit wet. Oh, hopefully it's still wet. If it dries out like that and you end up with a hard edge, just wet your brush, clean it off, dry it, and then just go in and sort of soften those edges a little bit. See, these got a little kind of hard edged a little bit, and it's okay to have an occasional hard edge in there because this hard edge here kind of separates that out. But sometimes you don't want them. But if you rinse off your brush and then dry it, you know, maybe not 100%, maybe there's a little bit of moisture so you can kind of soften that edge, at least along the top. Okay, and there you go. That's pretty much it. You can go in and, you know, soften some edges again if you want. Like I can go in here with just some water, soften an edge, lift. But you don't want to play around with it too much. You want to just let the water do its thing. Got these beautiful cloud shapes here. And now it's pretty much mostly dried. So I really can't do anything else with it without re-wetting the whole thing. But that's, you know, pretty much how you do your cloudy skies. And you're going to do a couple of these and hopefully have fun with it. Another little technique you can use, if I could zoom in here maybe a little bit closer. Okay, you see I went in and I touched up some of the edges of the clouds to kind of, it's good to have a contrast. I felt like they were all soft, and it's good to have some hard edges and some soft edges. On occasion, you can go into areas where you have maybe a fuzzy edge against a fuzzy edge at the bottom of this cloud, like I did in here and over here. Didn't work quite as well up here, but let me see if I can find an area where I can, let's try down in here. So what you can do is you can take some of your blue paint. I don't know if you can see it up here in the corner. Yep. Taking a small brush. And I'm just going to paint like I'm doing a wet on dry now, right? And I'm just going to kind of paint in like the edge of a cloud, kind of irregular here. Something like this, right? And then I'm going to wash my brush, dry it off a little bit, and then I'm going to take that edge and just kind of pull it out, sort of soften it. Dry my brush. And just kind of pull that up, soften that edge and pull it out. And then you kind of have to dry your brush so that you fade that in, but it doesn't disturb the paint around it. Okay, so you get enough moisture on your brush so you can kind of pull that out a little bit, but you have to soften it so it softens into and fades into the blue that's around it. You know, and it kind of creates that little crispness and edge to it, and it kind of makes that, you know, pop out a little bit like that to give you some, you know, hard edges and some soft edges. You just don't want to overuse it. Okay, up here I probably need to touch it up if I can a little bit. This edge didn't remain soft up here. I got to be careful because if you get too much wet on dry, you can end up with a cauliflower effect. But if you soften enough of it too, you can almost create, see how I'm lifting color out of there now? You can kind of create like a distant cloud out of it on top of that, if all else. I mean, ideally, most of the work you want to do it the first time kind of through, but if you want to go in and add a couple of little details like that here and there, that's just a kind of a way to go about kind of doing that.